Prince William's motorcade escorted through central London. Event L.A.S, October 2025. Long before the first rush of commuters stepped onto the pavements, small teams were already in place. Their movements were quiet and measured, almost invisible to anyone not trained to notice such things. To most people, the city still looked asleep. But beneath that calm surface, everything was already in motion. Streetlights reflected softly on slightly damp roads, leftovers from a light overnight drizzle. October air carried a mild chill, the kind that made people pull their coats tighter without thinking. Shop owners lifted shutters halfway, delivery drivers slowed at unexpected barriers, and buses followed adjusted routes without complaint. Nothing felt chaotic. Instead, there was a sense of careful order, as if the city itself understood the importance of the day. Police officers stood at key corners, not clustered, not dramatic, but spaced with intention. Some wore standard uniforms, others blended into the environment so naturally they looked like regular city workers. Their eyes, however, were alert. They watched traffic flow, checked signals, and communicated through discrete devices. Each person had a role, and each role fit into a larger plan that had been rehearsed many times before. The reason for this controlled morning was known, yet not loudly announced. Prince William was scheduled to attend Event L.A.S, an engagement that carried both public and symbolic importance. While official schedules had been released in advance, the exact movements remained carefully guarded. London had seen moments like this before, but familiarity never reduced the responsibility that came with it. As the sky slowly brightened, the city began to wake. Office workers emerged from underground stations, coffee cups in hand. Tourists checked maps, unaware that some of their planned routes would soon be redirected. Taxi drivers exchanged brief comments over radios, noting road closures and alternative paths. No one complained much. In London, adjustments like these were part of life. From a distance, everything looked normal. Traffic still moved. Pedestrians still crossed streets, but small details hinted that this was no ordinary day. Temporary barriers had been placed with precision. Surveillance cameras were being monitored more closely than usual. Communication lines between departments remained open and active. The atmosphere was calm, but it was a focused calm, sharpened by responsibility. Prince William himself was not yet visible, and that absence added to the quiet tension. His presence was anticipated rather than seen. Somewhere beyond public view, final checks were being completed. Vehicles were inspected, routes confirmed, timing adjusted down to the minute. Nothing was left to chance, not because of fear, but because duty required excellence. Those involved in the operation did not think of it as extraordinary. For them, it was another assignment, approached with professionalism and respect. Still, each person understood the weight of the task. Escorting a senior royal figure through the heart of a global city demanded more than skill. It demanded trust, between teams, between systems, and between the public and those protecting them. By mid-morning, the city's rhythm had changed slightly. People noticed the reduced traffic on certain streets. Some paused, curious, sensing something important was about to happen. Cameras appeared, not flashing wildly but held patiently. Conversation softened. There was no crowding, no shouting, just awareness. London had learned how to hold moments like this with restraint. There was pride, but it was quiet. Respect, but not exaggerated. The future king represented continuity for many, yet the city did not stop to stare. It simply adjusted, made space, and waited. In nearby buildings, offices continued their work, though employees occasionally glanced toward the windows. In cafes, customers speculated softly, guessing the timing. Security teams observed all of this without interference. Public life was allowed to flow, just within carefully drawn lines. The morning sun finally broke through the clouds, casting light across stone buildings and glass towers alike. It illuminated flags that hung still in the cool air. The city looked steady, prepared, and confident. For those responsible for the day's operation, this was the desired result. Smoothness mattered more than visibility. Prince William's role extended beyond a single appearance. His presence at event L.A.S. symbolized commitment, leadership, and connection. But on this morning, those ideas were expressed not through speeches or images, but through preparation. The escort, the planning, the patience, all of it reflected the quiet seriousness of public service. As time moved closer to the planned departure, communication increased subtly. Short confirmations passed between teams. Positions were adjusted. The city held its breath, not dramatically but attentively. There was no rush. Everything was unfolding as expected. For the public, this part of the story would later be remembered as a calm interruption to routine. For those behind the scenes, it was the most critical phase. The success of the day depended on how smoothly the morning unfolded. Every detail mattered, even the ones no one would ever notice. And so, central London stood ready. Streets were prepared, people were informed, and systems were aligned. The morning had done its job. The stage was set not for spectacle, but for movement with purpose. What followed would pass quickly through the city, but this quiet beginning, the careful, disciplined start, was what made everything else possible. The moment arrived without any announcement. There was no loud signal, no sudden change in the air, only a smooth shift that those paying close attention could sense. Somewhere just beyond public view, engines came to life. The sound was controlled and steady, not aggressive but confident. The motorcade was ready to move. The first vehicles rolled out quietly, keeping perfect distance between one another. They did not rush. Every turn had been practiced, every pause expected. Motorcycle officers moved ahead with calm focus, guiding the path forward while keeping the flow of the city intact. Their movements were precise, almost graceful, as they signaled and adjusted to the surroundings. Behind them, the main vehicles followed. From the outside, they looked like part of everyday traffic, dark, clean, unremarkable to someone unfamiliar with such occasions. Yet their presence carried meaning. Inside one of those vehicles sat Prince William, composed and aware, prepared for the day ahead. He did not look out for attention. His posture reflected duty rather than display. As the motorcade entered central London streets, the city responded in its own quiet way. Traffic slowed naturally. Drivers pulled aside without instruction. Pedestrians paused at crossings longer than usual, sensing that this moment deserved patience. There was no tension, only coordination between people who understood the importance of order. The motorcade passed buildings that had seen centuries of history. Stone walls, modern glass offices, and familiar street corners all formed the backdrop. For a few brief seconds, these places became part of something larger than themselves. Cameras lifted gently into the air, capturing the movement without disrupting it. Some people waved softly, others simply watched. Police officers positioned along the route maintained calm expressions. They did not shout commands or draw attention. Their presence was reassuring rather than imposing. Communication flowed smoothly between teams, carried through brief signals and quiet updates. Everything worked as planned, which was exactly the goal. Inside the vehicle, Prince William remained focused. He reviewed the schedule mentally, aware that his appearance represented more than attendance. He understood that every public movement carried meaning, not only for those watching in person, but for those who would later see images or read reports. His role required steadiness, and that steadiness showed even in moments unseen. The motorcade continued through well-known streets, passing landmarks that usually buzzed with noise and crowds. On this day, those spaces felt slightly different, still alive but more attentive. The city did not stop. It adjusted. That balance between movement and respect defined the moment. For many onlookers, the experience lasted only seconds. A glimpse of vehicles, a brief realization of who was inside, and then it was gone. Yet those seconds stayed with them. Some would mention it later in conversations, describing how close they had been to history passing by. Event staff at the destination monitored updates closely. Timelines were checked and rechecked. Doors were prepared. Final arrangements were confirmed. They knew that the arrival mattered just as much as the event itself. Smooth transitions reflected professionalism and respect. As the motorcade approached its destination, the pace remained steady. There was no dramatic change, no sudden increase in speed. Confidence came from control, not urgency. The surrounding streets remained calm, and the public continued to cooperate without being asked. The motorcade turned into the final stretch, moving seamlessly into the secured area. From the outside, it looked effortless. That ease was the result of preparation, trust, and experience. Nothing felt forced. Everything felt right. Prince William's vehicle slowed gently before coming to a stop. The journey through central London had been completed without disruption. The city, once briefly adjusted, began to return to its normal rhythm almost immediately. Traffic resumed, conversations restarted, and people moved on with their day. But for those who had witnessed the moment, there was a quiet sense of having seen something meaningful. Not a spectacle, not a show, but a demonstration of how tradition and modern life could move together without conflict. The motorcade itself became part of the story, not because of its size or speed, but because of its restraint. It reflected a leadership style rooted in responsibility rather than attention. In a city known for both its history and its progress, that message carried weight. As the vehicles disappeared from view, central London exhaled softly. The moment had passed, yet its impression remained. The escort through the city had done more than transport a royal figure. It had shown how coordination, respect, and calm could turn a complex movement into a quiet success. And while most of the city continued forward, unaware of the details, those involved understood the importance of what had just occurred. The journey was complete, the purpose fulfilled, and the day moved on, exactly as it was meant to. After the motorcade passed, the streets did not immediately return to their usual pace. For a short while, people stood where they were, as if holding onto the moment. Some lowered their phones slowly, checking the images they had captured. Others exchanged brief looks with strangers, sharing a quiet understanding that they had just witnessed something meaningful, even if it lasted only seconds. A woman waiting near a crossing adjusted her scarf and smiled to herself. She had not planned to see anything special that morning. She had simply been on her way to work. Yet now she felt slightly lighter, as though her ordinary routine had briefly touched history. She continued walking, but the memory stayed with her. Nearby, a delivery driver leaned against his van, watching traffic begin to flow again. He had paused out of respect, not because he was told to. For him, the moment was not about royalty alone, but about the way the city came together without instruction. He nodded once, climbed back into his vehicle, and carried on. Police officers remained at their positions for a while longer. Their expressions were calm, their posture relaxed but alert. They observed the crowd gently dispersing, making sure everything returned smoothly to normal. For them, success meant nothing noticeable happened. No confusion, no delay, no disorder. The quiet response of the public confirmed that their work had been effective. In cafes along the route, conversations shifted. Coffee cups were set down as people shared quick comments. Someone mentioned how organized everything looked. Another said how respectful the atmosphere felt. These were not loud discussions. They were thoughtful, brief exchanges before people returned to their screens or schedules. Tourists who had accidentally found themselves near the route checked their maps again. Some realized they had just been part of a rare moment. They took photos of the street, even though the motorcade was already gone. It was not about the vehicles anymore, but about being there when it happened. Office buildings absorbed the moment quietly. Employees returned to desks, but a few windows remained watched a little longer than usual. Emails were sent. Meetings resumed. Yet for a short time, focus had softened, replaced by reflection. Prince William's presence had been brief and controlled, but its effect lingered. It reminded people of continuity, of tradition moving calmly through modern life. There was no demand for attention, no interruption beyond what was necessary. That restraint made the moment feel genuine. Across the city, social media began to reflect what had happened. Short messages appeared. Photos were shared with simple captions. Most were respectful, some thoughtful, none exaggerated. The tone mirrored the streets, calm, observant, and composed. Meanwhile, behind the scenes, teams reviewed updates. Each unit confirmed completion of their role. Communication remained steady but began to slow. The pressure eased slightly, though professionalism stayed intact. They understood that even after the motorcade passed, their responsibility continued until the city fully returned to normal. Event staff prepared for the next stage of the day. They adjusted schedules and coordinated arrivals. The successful passage through the city gave them confidence. Everything was unfolding as planned. For those who had watched from a distance, perhaps from an office window or a bus seat, the moment felt almost unreal. It slipped into memory easily, like a quiet scene rather than a dramatic event. Yet it stood out precisely because it did not try to impress. In schools nearby, teachers guided students back to lessons. A few students asked questions, curious about what they had seen. Teachers answered simply, explaining the importance of respect and responsibility. The moment became a small lesson in civic life. Shopkeepers resumed arranging displays. Shutters lifted fully now. Business continued. But some shop owners mentioned the motorcade to regular customers, describing how smoothly everything had gone. Pride showed in their voices, not loud but sincere. The streets themselves seemed unchanged, yet somehow calmer. Traffic patterns returned to normal. Pedestrians crossed freely. The city moved on, but with a subtle afterthought. Prince William, now inside the secured venue, transitioned fully into his role for the event. The journey through the city had been part of his duty, not separate from it. He carried the awareness of public observation with him, understanding that even moments unseen mattered. Outside, the last temporary barriers were removed. Officers exchanged brief acknowledgments before repositioning. Their work blended back into the background where it belonged. By midday, central London looked as it always did. Few signs remained of the morning's careful coordination. Only those who had been present remembered the precise timing, the quiet respect, and the shared pause. That shared pause was the heart of the moment. Not excitement, not spectacle, but understanding. A city had made room for duty, and duty had passed through without disruption. For many, the memory would fade by evening. For others, it would become a small story told later, perhaps with a smile. Either way, it remained a reminder that even in a fast-moving world, calm and cooperation still held power. The streets had spoken without words. The people had responded without instruction. And in that brief interaction between public life and public service, something meaningful had been quietly affirmed. The transition from movement to stillness happened smoothly. As the motorcade reached the event location, everything shifted into a different rhythm. The busy streets were now behind them, replaced by a carefully prepared space where every detail had been arranged in advance. The atmosphere felt focused but calm, like a deep breath taken before an important moment. Event staff were already in position. They stood with quiet confidence, aware of their roles and ready to guide the next steps. Their expressions showed professionalism rather than excitement. For them, this was the result of weeks of planning, and now it was time for that planning to work exactly as intended. The vehicle carrying Prince William came to a gentle stop. There was no rush, no sudden movement. Doors opened at the right moment and he stepped out with a composed presence. His posture was steady, his expression calm and attentive. This was not a dramatic entrance, but a respectful arrival, matching the tone of the day. Those nearby observed carefully but discreetly. Security teams adjusted their positions smoothly, creating a protective space without drawing attention. The goal was not to dominate the scene, but to support it quietly. Their movements blended into the background, allowing the focus to remain on the purpose of the visit. Prince William acknowledged those around him with polite nods and brief exchanges. Each interaction, though short, carried meaning. It showed respect for the people who made the event possible and recognition of the shared effort involved. His approach reflected a leadership style based on connection rather than distance. Inside the venue, the atmosphere was thoughtful and organized. Lighting was balanced, seating arranged carefully, and schedules timed precisely. Conversations were soft but purposeful. Attendees understood the significance of the gathering and the role Prince William played in it. There was a sense that everyone present was part of something larger than themselves. As he moved through the entrance, the shift from public space to event setting became clear. Outside, the city continued its rhythm. Inside, attention narrowed toward discussion, ideas, and responsibility. This contrast highlighted how public service often moves quietly between visibility and focus. Prince William took time to listen. He greeted key individuals involved in event L.A.S., acknowledging their work and contributions. His engagement was genuine, marked by eye contact and careful attention. He did not dominate conversations. Instead, he allowed others to speak, reinforcing the collaborative nature of the event. Observers noted how naturally he adapted to the environment. There was no sign of strain or distraction from the journey earlier that day. The smooth arrival through London had allowed him to arrive centered and prepared. That preparation now showed in his calm demeanor. Event L.A.S. itself represented progress, cooperation, and long-term thinking. Prince William's presence added weight to these themes, not through authority alone, but through involvement. He was there to support, to learn, and to encourage dialogue. This approach resonated with attendees, many of whom valued thoughtful leadership. Behind the scenes, coordinators monitored timing closely. Every segment of the program flowed into the next without pressure. Adjustments were made quietly when needed. The success of the arrival allowed the event to continue without delay, reinforcing the importance of careful planning. As Prince William took his place for the formal portions of the event, the room settled into attentive silence. The focus shifted fully toward purpose. The earlier movement through the city now felt like a necessary journey that had led to this moment of engagement. Outside the venue, security presence remained steady but unobtrusive. The surrounding area stayed calm, with normal city life continuing nearby. Passers-by were aware that something important was happening, but they were not interrupted by it. This balance reflected the respect shown on both sides. Inside, discussions unfolded with clarity. Prince William participated thoughtfully, contributing where appropriate and listening where needed. His role was not to dominate the conversation, but to strengthen it. This balance made his involvement meaningful rather than symbolic. Those attending the event felt the importance of the moment, not because of attention, but because of intention. The calm arrival, the focused setting, and the respectful engagement all reinforced the seriousness of the work being done. As time passed, the initial awareness of the motorcade and public movement faded. What remained was the substance of the event itself. This shift demonstrated how the journey was only the beginning. The real work happened here, in careful discussion and shared responsibility. Prince William's presence reminded everyone that leadership is often expressed quietly. It is shown through listening, consistency, and preparation. The smooth transition from public movement to focused engagement reflected these values clearly. By the time the event reached its later stages, the arrival earlier that day felt distant yet connected. It had set the tone. Calm, respectful, and purposeful. The way he arrived mirrored the way he participated. For those involved, this part of the day would be remembered as a moment when everything aligned. Preparation met opportunity. Movement led to meaning. And the city's brief pause had allowed an important conversation to begin without interruption. As the event continued, one thing was clear. The journey through central London had not been about attention or display. It had been about responsibility. And that responsibility now lived fully within the walls of event L.A.S, where focus, cooperation, and quiet leadership took center stage. As the event drew closer to its conclusion, the atmosphere inside the venue remained calm and thoughtful. Conversations had deepened over time, and the initial formality softened into a sense of shared purpose. People listened carefully, took notes, and exchanged ideas with quiet confidence. The presence of Prince William continued to shape the tone, not by commanding attention but by encouraging focus and cooperation. When the final discussions came to an end, there was no sudden shift. The transition was gentle, much like the arrival earlier that day. Attendees stood, thanked one another, and reflected briefly on what had been shared. For many, the value of the event was not in any single moment, but in the steady flow of ideas and respect that filled the room. Prince William took time to acknowledge those who had contributed. His words were measured and sincere, offering appreciation rather than praise. He recognized effort, commitment, and the importance of working together over time. These remarks were received warmly, not because of who delivered them, but because they reflected what everyone present understood. As preparations for departure began, coordination resumed quietly. Schedules were reviewed, routes confirmed, and teams moved into position without drawing attention. The same care that had guided the morning now returned, ensuring the end of the day would be just as smooth. Outside, the city continued its rhythm. Traffic flowed freely, pedestrians moved without hesitation, and shops welcomed customers. Most people were unaware that the event was concluding. London had absorbed the moment and released it, returning fully to itself. Prince William exited the venue calmly, acknowledging staff and coordinators with polite gestures. There was no sense of urgency, only readiness. The day's responsibilities had been fulfilled, and now it was time to move forward. The motorcade prepared once more, engines starting softly. Vehicles aligned with practiced precision. Motorcycle units took their positions, and communication confirmed that everything was in place. The process mirrored the morning, reinforcing the sense of continuity. As the motorcade departed, there was little notice from the public. This time, the streets did not pause as they had earlier. The city had already adjusted and moved on. That quiet acceptance was, in itself, a sign of success. Inside the vehicle, Prince William reflected briefly on the day. Not in dramatic terms, but with a sense of completion. The journey through London, the discussions at the event, and the calm cooperation throughout had all formed a single, connected experience. Each part mattered because it supported the others. Behind the scenes, teams began closing their operations. Temporary arrangements were removed, reports were noted, and responsibilities concluded. There was satisfaction in knowing the day had unfolded exactly as intended. No disruptions, no unnecessary attention, only steady progress. For the officers involved, the work was complete. They returned to their usual roles, blending back into the city they served. Their presence faded, but their contribution remained part of the day's success. Elsewhere, people who had witnessed the morning movement continued with their routines. Some mentioned it in passing, others forgot entirely. That was the nature of such moments. They touched lives lightly, leaving impressions without demanding memory. As evening approached, London shifted into a different pace. Lights turned on, streets filled again, and the day settled into night. The earlier significance dissolved into the city's endless flow of moments. The story of the motorcade and the event would later appear in brief reports and quiet conversations. It would not be remembered for spectacle, but for its smoothness, for how tradition and modern life moved together without conflict. Prince William's role in the day reflected something simple yet enduring: leadership expressed through preparation, respect, and presence. Not loud, not dramatic, but steady and reliable. The city had offered its streets, its patience, and its cooperation. In return, it had been respected. That exchange formed the true meaning of the day. By nightfall, central London looked exactly as it always did. Yet within that normal view lived the memory of a day when everything worked as it should. When planning met purpose and responsibility passed quietly through familiar streets. The event ended, the motorcade departed, and the city carried on. Nothing needed to be added. Nothing needed to be taken away. The moment had completed itself naturally. And in that quiet completion, there was a reminder that the most meaningful events are often the ones that leave no trace. Only balance, understanding, and a sense that things are moving forward, calmly and with care.